So we also need, in addition to a loan officer, unless we're paying cash, we need an attorney. It is required for this process to buy, for the most part. So we're going to call Patrick from Fredrikson Byron, who's got over 36 years in corporate law, and you've been advising clients and developers and different companies in real estate for many, many years. Really, truly an expert in this area. Tell us a little bit about what the requirements are, if you would.
Yeah, a little bit. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I enjoy doing these. I've spoken to the Minnesota Realtors Association on occasion as well. Having said all that, I always tell people I am not a real estate lawyer. I do international corporate, and I represent developers and buyers. I started our Latin America practice at the firm in 1998. I'm now the only gringo in the practice. And Aramis Mendez, who's part of our real estate group, is here as well and assists on these as well. We've got 3 lawyers who are licensed in Mexico, one who is licensed in Venezuela, and she has a master's degree here and helps us with these deals as well. I've been going to Mexico since 1979. So I've seen a lot of changes in Mexico. I've been to all of the places we're talking about, and I've sold or helped buy properties with my clients, both for commercial development for tourist development, and for personal homes and residences. And so I've kind of seen pretty much everything down there. One of the struggles with opening up those markets has always been a little bit of the financing piece to, kind of democratize it a little bit more, because in the past most of the buyers have been high-end buyers and they're cash buyers. I've done projects in Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Belize, Costa Rica, Panama. I had the honor of representing Mel Gibson, and stayed in his house in Costa Rica, and so I've had a lot of very interesting experiences that I probably wouldn't otherwise have as just a plain vanilla corporate lawyer. Let's go to the next slide. This is a little bit about what we're going to talk about. I'm going to try and go through these quickly so you're not leaving. But why buy real estate in Mexico? How to locate it? We've talked about that. Due diligence is a huge part of this, and realtors are a huge part of helping with that due diligence piece. Foreign investment laws and restrictions on how you buy, where you buy. Fideicomisos, buying individually, using entities to buy these so you have more options when you sell. Purchase agreements, notaries. Notaries in Mexico are much different than notaries here in the United States. Closing costs, registration of the property in the public registry, and what happens if you don't do that. And then safety. I'll talk a little bit about safety, but you guys have talked about safety in your markets, and I've been going there since 1998, and have never had any issues, and my clients haven't had any issues. So. Why buy real estate in Mexico? This is a picture of my cabin. Next picture. This is actually Manzanillo. Next slide. So how to find real estate in Mexico, we've talked a little bit about that, and you guys have already addressed that, so we'll move to the next one. So the question, can you buy real estate in Mexico? Yes, you can. If it's within the interior of Mexico, it's not in the restricted zone, you can buy it in your own name, fee title. If it's within the restricted zone, you have to buy it, if you're a foreigner, through a Mexican bank trust or fideicomiso. Article 27 of the Constitution outlines that. Next slide. And well, just let me go back to that for a second. The restricted zone is a strip of 100 kilometers from the border, or 50 kilometers from the beach, basically, from the shoreline. So if you're buying on the beach, you're buying property in Mexico as a foreigner, you're buying it through a fideicomiso, unless you're buying it to develop it, and there's some exceptions for developers. Due diligence. I always tell clients, you're not in Kansas. Don't do things in Mexico that you wouldn't do here. There's a lot of exuberance when you go down and you see a property on the beach and you want to jump in and just get it while you can, get it quickly. But you need to do due diligence. You need to do some background searching on the area, the title, making sure that the person who you're buying from actually has title, and maybe making sure that the person who he bought it from or she bought it from had title. Making sure that those transactions were registered, because if they weren't registered, you may have other people making claims that could step in and try to cloud your title or make claims against the property, and you'd have to deal with that. There are a number of different sections of the registry in Mexico. There are possessory rights, there are fee title rights, and there are ejido agronomy rights. And an ejido in Mexico is, I always struggle a little bit to describe what an ejido is, but they're basically historically agricultural groups. I think the closest analogy I could say is it's kind of like an Indian tribe, but not really. There's a lot of beautiful beach ejido land, and if you buy ejido land, you have to get signatures from every member of the ejido, or you run the risk of not having proper title. I've had clients who've come to me and said, I've got this strip on the beach, it's an ejido property, and I say, you have to really step back a little bit and make sure you can do this correctly. And I've had clients in Puerto Vallarta, in the Puerto Vallarta area, a guy from Minnesota who, I have to say, he had a lot of guts. Went through the whole process. We transferred the property from the agronomy registry into the public registry, and the value of that property has gone up 300% probably. Contract rights versus title. A lot of deals, may only sell you a contract right. It's something similar to a timeshare, where you don't get a deed, but you just get a contract right to use the property. So you want to be very aware of that. There are areas in Puerto Vallarta where you get land leases because you can't get fee title. So you have to be kind of aware of those things. Due diligence is key. You want to pull a certificate of no liens, just similar to what you would want to do here. Certificates of no taxes due. You want to make sure the zoning is appropriate. And then the beach area in Mexico is public property. It's owned by the government. It's owned by the public. And in order to keep other people off of that area, you have to get a concession, and you have to apply for that. If you don't get it, you may find that you have a palapa on the beach in front of your house. And so it's important to look into that. Next slide. Ownership. So again, we've talked about this. Non-residential, if it is in the restricted zone, you may be able to do that through a Mexican entity if you're developing it or for commercial purposes. Mexican entities all require 2 shareholders, 2 members, 2 owners. The 2 most common Mexican entities are Sociedad Anónima, which is equivalent to a corporation in the United States, and a Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, which is like a limited liability company, roughly, still pays taxes at an entity level, but you can do if you get this deep into it, you can do a check-the-box election to have it treated as a pass-through entity for U.S. tax purposes. For residential, for foreigners in the restricted zone, you have to do it through a fideicomiso. I occasionally run into sellers or even attorneys in Mexico say it's not required. It is required. You have to be very clear about that. So these bank trusts have terms of 50 years. Some of the earlier ones had 30-year terms. You can assign the remainder of a fideicomiso to a new buyer. If there's a lot of years left on it, that's not a bad option. It would be cheaper in some instances, but I usually recommend if you're going to buy the property, go ahead and do a new trust and get your 50-year term. As I said, you can renew them. What the trust is basically similar to a U.S. trust. You have a trustee, which is the bank. The bank will enter into an agreement with you, and the bank will be the trustee. You, as the buyer, will be the beneficiary. If you have a lender, the lender will be the primary beneficiary, and you will be a secondary beneficiary. And once the loan is paid off, you become the primary. You can have all of your family members be beneficiaries. If you do that and the primary beneficiary passes away, then those secondary beneficiaries can more easily step in and take over the property in the trust. If you don't do that, you may have to go through a probate process in Mexico and prove that the person has been deceased, prove that you have a right as a beneficiary to take that interest, and it can take a process in Mexico to get that done. So, highly recommend thinking about who you want to have as beneficiaries. You have all the rights you have with ownership. The only difference is you're going to pay an annual fee, and there are certain restrictions that are going to be laid out in the agreement, but very few. So it's a pretty seamless way to do things. It's really kind of a legal fiction. Shouldn't be anything to be afraid of. We've been doing it for many, many years, and I've never had an issue with it. Not when they're done right. Next slide. So some options. You can purchase your property through a U.S. LLC, make that the beneficiary. A benefit of that is that you have more options in the U.S. level if you're changing ownership at the LLC level. And you still may have to notify the bank trust if there's changes in membership in the U.S., but it gives you some additional options in terms of how you could transfer the property. So the second option is individual. If you want to own that individually and be the individual beneficiary, you can do that. Next slide. Another way to do it, especially if you're thinking about renting it for income and you don't have, the developer being the rental agent or, some other third party that's taking care of the rentals, you can set up a Mexican entity, get a Mexican tax ID, run the income through the Mexican entity and pay the taxes in Mexico, get a credit on your U.S. return for taxes that are paid in Mexico. Next slide. The purchase agreement. So it's kind of a two-step process in Mexico, and there are times when I have recommended to clients to collapse that into one process. That's usually where the client has all of the terms laid out and they know what they're going to do and there's no dispute about it with the seller. Excuse me. Because you can move right to the public deed, the escritura, and have the notary outline this in that public deed. Probably the more common way, and I'm guessing that all of you deal with a promissory purchase agreement, whether it's a realtor form or it's a private form. And that agreement is going to outline all of the things that you would see with your agreements here in the United States. The difference would be if there's a fideicomiso, it's going to outline the fact that you're going to have a fideicomiso and it's going to have those terms in a separate agreement in the fideicomiso agreement. One of the very, very important things that you want to make sure you do is have it registered. Because again, if you don't have it registered, third parties can make claims against it. Having it registered is evidence of the fact that you have that title. It also can affect taxes, because if your seller hasn't registered their deed, then you're going to have them register it typically for you to get title from that person. And a lot of times the sellers didn't register because they didn't want to pay the registry fees and they didn't want to pay the taxes, and they were thinking, I'm going to pass this on to the next party. And you don't want to be the party at the end who has to pay all that cost in between. So you're going to execute the deed, which is either going to be the promissory purchase agreement embodied into a public deed, or it's going to be a fideicomiso agreement embodied into the public deed. And you're going to do that in front of the notary in Mexico. And the notary in Mexico is responsible for reviewing the title and making sure that the title is correct. I am a pessimist, so I don't always rely on the notary. I usually tell clients, if we're representing you, we're going to ask for the 2 previous purchasers' public deeds. We're going to review them. We're going to make sure that everything is correct, and the notary is, a bonus. And then title insurance is a double bonus. But if you don't appear personally in Mexico, you would have to execute and grant somebody a power of attorney. That power of attorney is a document that is going to give them the right to sign your documents on your behalf. People are sometimes afraid of powers of attorney because they give people a lot of authority, and sometimes it's very broad authority. And even if you want to restrict it, a lot of times the notaries will require those powers of attorney to be pretty general. So you want to make sure that you're giving that power of attorney to somebody in the notary's office, or to somebody you have trust in. And there are many occasions where one of our lawyers will get a power of attorney, go to the notary's office and sign these documents. Many occasions where somebody in the notary's office will get that power of attorney and they'll sign the documents. You're going to go to the notary, you're going to pay the purchase price, you're going to have the notary read the public deed. Some of them are more diligent about that than others, but they're going to typically read the whole thing, which is not the most interesting and scintillating thing that you can do during a day, but it's a requirement to formalize the documents. You're going to pay the purchase price. The notary is responsible for collecting the purchase price, paying any fees, and paying any taxes. And so they will take care of that typically. And then the notary is going to register that public deed with the public registry in the location where the property is located. And that registration process, I don't know what you're seeing in Puerto Vallarta right now, but we're seeing anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, or I think the last one I actually had was 3 months before I saw anything. And they're taking longer in different places depending upon how much volume there is and kind of who's doing the registrations. I don't know what you're seeing.
Like 4 months.
Yeah. But you do want to make sure you get a copy of that with the notary stamp on it, and that it's, if you want to get what is in effect a certified copy, and keep that just so you make sure you've got that for your records. Next slide. Who is a notary? A notary is kind of a quasi-governmental official. They're lawyers, and they get special commissions to be notaries. Historically, notaries have been handed down from mother to daughter, father to son, father to daughter, whatever. They've been inherited through the family. They are a printing press for money, because you're getting a fee for basically incorporating something into a record and filing it. It's a very important position in Mexico. Real estate documents, wills, credit agreements, powers of attorney, those kinds of important public documents, or just authentication of signatures should be notarized. Otherwise, people can make claims that it's not my signature, or they just don't get registered in the public registry. A lot of times the notary will be selected by the seller. or the developer, I typically push back on that. I hate to say that, but it's kind of like notaries will tell you, I have no conflict of interest. I don't have a horse in this race. I don't care, who does what. But if the notary is working for a developer and every deal they do, or 90% of the deals they do, are from that developer, they're going to naturally kind of look after the interests of the developer. So, if you have a lawyer, the lawyer's going to look at your interests. If you, have any questions about the notary, get your own notary, and we can help you with that. We have a history of working with notaries in virtually every corner of Mexico. The charges are based on the transaction value up to a cap. We've talked a little bit about closing costs. Closing costs are typically, I rarely see 4%. Most of the ones I see are 7, in the 7 to 10% range. So it's something that you have to take into account and advise your clients about. And then the registry. So there's a fee for the notary for the notarization. There may be some additional fees for them if they're doing some additional legal work in addition to the notary task. And then you're going to have you're going to pay your taxes. You're going to pay any fees that are required for the fideicomiso. There may be past real estate taxes that need to be paid. If there's an association, there may be association fees that need to be paid. And then next slide. Power of attorney, we've talked about that. Thank you. Purchase price, certificate of no liens, certificate of no taxes. This is an earlier version of my presentation. The transfer tax now 3%. It went up at the beginning of 2025. Notary fees, again, 1 to 2% of the purchase price typically. Public registry fees, typically about 1%. And then, the fideicomiso fees that you're going to pay to the bank. Association fees, all of those types of fees. Title insurance. Stewart, I think, was the first title insurance company to have title insurance in Mexico. I've worked with them, done seminars with them. You will hear people say don't get title insurance because the notary's job is to make sure that everything is taken care of. I will tell my clients that, but I say, if you want some additional security, get a title insurance policy. I haven't looked at one recently because most of my clients aren't getting them. But in the past, they have not been as comprehensive as a title insurance policy would be here, and there's more exceptions. I don't know if you have any different experience on those, but next slide. Registration of the deed. One of the things we didn't talk about was getting the SRE permit. If you're buying property in Mexico, you need to get a foreign investment permit. They're going to include a Calvo clause, which is a clause that says, as a foreigner buying real estate in Mexico, you are going to waive your right to protection of U.S. law, and you are going to accept Mexican law. There's no options. If you're going to do it, you have to do it. And then we've talked about registration of the escritura. Next slide. And that is our group. Any questions or? That's my presentation.
Yeah, very thorough.
I don't know how long that took, but it was.
Just a little over on the time, but that's okay. No, it was very good. Thank you for your insight.